your screen.
Thank you. Okay, so you can see the red painting now. Is that correct? Great. So I'd like to thank the organisers for this opportunity to speak and for the programme of very interesting speakers. It's been a very enjoyable day so far. My guiding question in an ongoing research and experimental process centres around the question, can an abstract painting be prescribed for an ailment? I have leapt to take it as given that consciousness is fundamental. I've made this leap because it's borne out by my life experience. This means that consciousness is not generated by the brain, has no arrow of time, and doesn't die when we do. If consciousness is not a product of a series of physical interactions, nor tied to matter, then it's free to use light, form, and energy to work with the other elements, to make change, to put in right alignment, or to heal. I've been an abstract painter for my whole creative life. I believe that it's a powerful vehicle of transformation. I'm working to examine and document that belief and to explicate its usefulness for others. Abstraction relies on the invisible, the liminal, and openness and a right combining of elements to be successful. It's a mysterious esoteric, even on a dull day. The practice of abstraction has led me through its nature to alchemy, which led me to Robert Boyle of Boyle's Law fame. By all accounts, Robert Boyle was primarily interested in alchemy for its medicinal powers. I've come to understand that I'm interested in art for the same reason. Just as alchemy is so often mistaken for a riches acquiring pursuit, so too is art, and the true purpose of both are lost. Throughout time, substances, occurrences, and procedures have been combined to help us get through life, to correct ills, and to aid in merely living. In the time of the great alchemists, the substances, occurrences, and procedures were different from those we use today. Sometime around 1684 in the summer, Robert Boyle was in his sister's, possibly Lady Ranelagh's house, when he had one of his then frequent nosebleeds. She obtained for him true moss of a dead man's skull. He recounts in his work diary, it had been sent her by a great person for a present out of Ireland, in which country I found it less rare and more esteemed than elsewhere. Sir Francis Bacon had, in the early 1600s, identified Ireland as a good source of skull moss, since there were heaps of unburied dead there. The stock of skull moss had been kept replenished by the upheavals and massacres of the 1640s. Boyle, I was going to employ it after the usual manner, which is to put it into the patient's nostrils. But before I did it, I had the curiosity to try, notwithstanding the briskness of my hemorrhage, whether the medicine would produce its effect by being only held in my hand, and therefore covering a piece of moss with my fist, that the warmth might a little actuate the medicine. I found, to the wonder of the bystanders, that blood speedily stopped, nor, thanks be to God, have I been troubled with hemorrhage for some years from that very time. And lest you think that skull moss is merely an effective absorber of liquid substances, Helmut described the activation process of skull moss to be caused by celestial orbs acting as sidereal sperm, bestowing macrocosmal vitality, which descended from the stars, combining with the concentrated elixir of man's quintessential microcosmal spirit lodged in the bones of the skull, and how this promoted the growth of a moss with rich therapeutic potential, including that of a weapon salve, which is an ointment reputed to heal over great distances. There's a great article on this called The Periwig of a Dead Cranium, Medicinal Skull Moss by Christopher Duffin. It was believed that when a person dies a violent death, the soul or vital force passes up through the body and lodges on the bone at the top of the skull. The skull becomes and remains infused with the good stuff with life energy for approximately 7 years. And when left in the elements, the damp places, moss will weave its way back and forth in the crevices of bone. This moss, when harvested, will stem the flow of blood. The secretness of alchemy is likely because of the danger inherent in transmuting poison to medicine. People have a habit of using something not quite understood to sell something not quite whole to people who think they're buying something authentic. The first time I saw that my work could be more than just arrangements of shape and color, directions by my conscious self, was in observing paintings I'd made in the days after the plane flew into the World Trade Center. I was living in New York City within sight of it all. I did what I did in those days, and I put paint on paper. Months later, when I saw it again, I was overwhelmed by the specificity of the work, the parallels between the appearances and feelings that developed later around these enormous sudden events and the work I had made. It was a clear indication that I had access to a system, if system is the right word, which includes so much more than I was aware of. I decided then to see what would happen if I consistently got out of the way enough for this preconceptual part of me to make work. The space or state before we name something is elemental. We often take what is presented by the conceptual mind to be reality. A more full or accurate picture, a right view of the world, includes the non-conceptual. Seeing the world beyond or before thought comes first in the form of synchronicities and dreams. And this is where the developed attention of a practitioner of abstract painting is useful. Abstraction is the ideal vehicle to make visible that which does not have a fixed physical form, to visualize interactions between substance and energy, and to document the distillation of light, form, and movement in the body and mind. As I work, I feel out into space in an open way, and I wait. I let my body do something. Sometimes it can take quite a while. Sometimes it starts with sweeping to distract the mind, engage the body in space. As the body is working, I make decisions by letting something that knows decide. Body is perception, is spatialized thought. The work happens in the non-conceptual space of the world. This can make it terrifically difficult to talk about. The things disappear in the very moment that they become clear. That's a clue for the abstract painter that what they're doing is true. Merleau-Ponty wrote, "The hallmark of the visible is to have a lining of invisibility." I base my research into the healing benefits of abstract painting on the results of two bodies of work I made a decade apart in 2006 and 7, 2016 and 17. I didn't know before I began each that they would be, but they were transformational. Before both, I was lost in a dark world of grief characterized by an inability to work and a sense of being stuck. This has become the indicator that there was something directly in front of me that I needed to address. In both instances, one the breakup of a long and difficult relationship, and the other one, the loss of a precious, much wanted being. Once the dark night fermentation stage gave way to sublimation, where thought becomes action, the work required that I show up to the studio, occupy the space, and stay with myself. This means sensing into the spaces inside the body, distinguishing between thought, feeling, emotion, the primordial, imagination, history. Each work in the series I was making was sequential, and each worked on the body-mind as it was on the day or for the period of time it took to make each work. The next work would do what it needed to do. I left each of those bodies of work with a feeling of being transformed by and during it. It was not just the external circumstances, that external circumstances changed. My body looked different, the way I felt physically had improved, but it also had the act of making the work. It's also that the act of making the work changed an internal configuration. My being belonged to the world more fully. My chemistry functioned symbiotically with my environment. I could feel the air around me as not separate from anything. Shortly after this, I heard about Robert Boyle for the first time. It happened to be about 2 weeks after making this work entitled Robert's Head. The coincidence set up a cascade of curiosity and connections that continues to this day, including my discovery that I live in the far west of Ireland on the land Robert inherited from his father, the first Earl of Cork. I don't have time to go into that story now, it'll be in the book. I began to study his text, Experiments and Considerations Touching Colours, published in 1664. It's an account of experiments he made on any number of colour phenomena. So the idea of making experiments of my own took hold. I was using painting as a means to explore the interior of the body. They were experiments in the sense of, what if I try this and now try that? What would be revealed and what's the result? To see what a body of work is doing or what it's for can be a slow process. Years can go by between the start of something and its end, like this painting here. I started it in 2009. It became finished in 2020. It's become the basis of what I'm doing now, and I still don't understand what's happening. So when I was invited to speak at the Robert Boyle Summer School in 2019, at the end of the weekend, after attending all the lectures and being in conversation with scientists and researchers, that was when, for the first time, I wondered if my own personal experiments and transmutations would be useful for others. What if I could prescribe a painting for your ailment? How would it work? Would it work? What would I have to know to be able to do that? What would someone have to tell me? How would they tell me? Would my thinking mind have to know what you were saying, or is there another way for you to let me know? Could I paint something that someone needed? How exactly did it work for me? Could I describe the process well enough to enable someone else to paint themselves a cure? To see if I could make a map of the territory for myself, I've been reading, listening to all I can about the mechanics of things, the workings of the eye, the physics of color, arts-based health studies, for example, the positive studies on the decrease of post-operative pain in patients when hospitals use specific art and color in the surroundings. And yes, it has occurred to me that if consciousness doesn't die, Robert Boyle consciousness could be available to help me perform medicinal experiments as he was wont to do. So what comes creeping through all these years of getting out of the way is an evidence of knowing, and knowing I can't take credit for, that seems so obvious I don't even know why I'm talking about it sometimes. A sense of there being something that is connected certainly to the 5 elements. The issue is not whether this information is real. The issue is the interface between the thing experiencing the world in a day-to-day state and the larger, well, you could say the larger picture. The possibility of physical transformation through creating or observing a piece of art becomes more feasible once the full extent of the body's non-conscious capability is seen. On a recent residency at Uillinn, the West Cork Art Centre, I posed the question, can an abstract painting be prescribed for an ailment? I created tests called experiments in listening. I invited the general public to interact and give feedback. Case study 1, person C was a maker, a painter themselves, and familiar with the process of facing a blank page and filling it. I introduced and invited them to perform a process I had devised, which is similar to mine. They took up materials and made a non-representational work on paper. In their feedback, they acknowledged that a connection was made to an unease, an immediate connection to something to be worked with, something familiar, and they suggested that the process called for longer-term engagement. Case study 2, person A, we worked with a pre-prepared colored paper and the arrangement of such. Again, a connection to the nugget of dis-ease or the unaligned part happened very fast. The subject had a deep connection to color and preference. And the meaning of color, preference, and the feeling of its power was present and striking in every person I talked to. Arrangement 2 seemed to be a straightforward action. In this case, as in others, an expression of doubt or second guessing came after an assured moment or movement to place shapes in relation to each other. At this early stage of the experimentation with others, I've come to see that what is important about a metaphorical or physical transformation is that we give it the time it needs to happen. We all know what it is that ails us. We don't always listen deeply enough or have someone listen to us attentively enough to allow the transmutation of our ailments to occur. The eye receives light, making a color in the brain at the rods and cones. The visual cortex at the back of our brain is where the images are generated. Hormones are activated when certain color light at certain times is present. And because of our mutually interacting brain regions, retinal projections to the upper brainstem create sympathetic and parasympathetic outflows. What I'm saying here is that the sensory surfaces create signals and reinforced connections that have implications in the body. We are, like everything else, made of the 5 elements. Earth is flesh and solidity. Water is blood, bile, tears, and cohesion. Fire is the electrical, chemical, metabolic, and energetic systems, as well as temperature. Air is the breath, oxygen and other gases. It is motion. And space, which accommodates all the others, is consciousness. And now a last quote by my friend Robert Boyle. There may be diverse unheeded agents which by unperceived means may have great operations upon the body we consider, and work such changes that, and enable it to work such changes on other bodies as we are rather to be ascribed to some other unheeded agents than to those other bodies. Robert Boyle, Cosmical Qualities of Things. My book, Irish Moss of a Dead Man's Skull, will be published by Owl Circus Press in 2024. And thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you, Nuala. Really interesting. So our final speaker for this panel and for today is Cynthia Schumacher, Jungian and Archetypal Studies doctoral candidate at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Cynthia is contributing editor in New Visions and New Voices, extending the principles of archetypal pedagogy